Hey everyone, Views here. Today we'll be taking a look at possible upcoming banners for the first half of the month of December 2020. This will be a pretty packed month, and for the most part I'll just be going over possible banners in the normal banner rotation for JP, and then also following patterns that they've implemented into global banner releases. So we'll also take a look at the possible Christmas banner, since I think that would probably happen in the first half of the month, and then we'll probably get New Year's banner towards the end of the month. So jumping right into it, we're going to take a look at the Dorothy menstrual banner. This is the next banner in the normal banner rotation, so this is possibly coming up next. Looking at it in the metal shop, it's going to have the same stats on the job as all the other menstrual jobs. So 400 stats total, 100 in each stat. And then looking at the weapon, it has a very unique skill. It's going to have the equivalent effect from, let's say, the Alt Red Riding Hood hammer. Pretty unique. M attack up by a massive amount, and then 1.5 times effect when at disadvantage. And then it's also going to have increased M attack to one member of your vanguard by a small amount. For 17 costs, average stats, I think this is an alright weapon. It's pretty unique, and I think there are really specialized minstrels out there in guilds that need M attack weapons. So I think this is going to be a must pull just for the fact that this is a very solid skill. And since a lot of vanguards are M attack, that's going to be very useful. And then looking at this nightmare, it's going to be very niche. It's going to be the gacha version of a meal head that we already have. It's going to be tier 3, massively raise just physical attack for your surviving vanguard. And then pretty alright stats, but is favoring attack. So it could be alright to have on a vanguard, but then again, you're probably not using buffing nightmare, so it's definitely not a reason to pull. And then scrolling down, we're now taking a look at this sword right here. This is going to be a very unique sword, and there's also another weapon just like it later we'll go over. It's going to have a tier 3 damage skill, but also increase combo count by 5 when comboing. So this is going to be probably, I think this is the first weapon we have in the Vanguard weapon pool that with this type of skill. There's already Halua Head, and then that's starting to be phased out of rear guards. So now it's going to be Vanguards that are going to be generating much more combo with weapons like these. Then also Replenish Magic 2 is okay for Vanguards to have. It's definitely not the worst skill you can have. But it also does have balanced attack stats, only favoring P attack slightly. So I think this is going to be a must pull just for this skill alone if you are a physical vanguard or a breaker, possibly, if those still exist. But this is alright, but there is a gun later that I think is going to be better than that. And then also looking at this hammer, it's going to be a solid, just pure attack skill, and then attack debuff with decent attack stats comparable to the last weapon. So I think this is going to be a pretty decent physical banner to pull on. So if you're a physical vanguard, I would recommend picking up at least the sword. And then if you get the hammer as well, that's another bonus. Looking at the staff, it's going to be really good. Recovery support 2, best skill or support skill you can have. And then 1.5, and then increases physical attack, which is alright. Not ideal. And then average defense stats. I think for recovery support 2, that alone is going to make this pretty decent with the 1.5 targets, because there are still single target weapons in cleric grids, and this could be really decent filler for that at the moment. And that's going to cover it for this banner. So to recap, I would probably only pull on a minstrel as a minstrel just to get this one weapon if I do spec towards M attack. Other than that, I don't think it's going to be very useful in most grids. And then I would pull on this if I was a physical vanguard, because both these weapons are solid enough to be in current grids and also prepping towards like a full physical grid. And then I would probably just pull one copy of the staff, because there are better weapons coming, and I think the spec banner for clerics is always pretty decent. And then onto the next banner after that would be the Snow White Gunner. This is going to be an interesting banner. I'm not too sure what they're going to do about this, because there is the paid weapon on it, but we'll see. It's going to have normal gunner stats. It's going to have 700 M defense, 100 M attack. Pretty decent art right there. And then looking at the weapon, it is alright. It has probably the second best attack skill you can have, which is tier 3 damage and it decreases their M defense. And then also DC 1. But it has balanced stats overall for 17 cost. I think most Vanguards right now are getting to the point where they're reaching their upper limit and now they're just trying to optimize their attack stats. So I don't think this is going to be a must pull unless you're just pulling for the job. Other than that, there's no reason to go for copies of that. This Griffin is going to be the equivalent of Blue Poppy, like you see down here. And it is going to have really high defense stats. This is going to be, I think, in the top 5 for Gacha Nightmares in JP still. So this is going to be very decent for clerics. But other than that, there's nothing else on this banner for clerics. So honestly, the only way you'd probably get that is if you pity that nightmare, because I would not pull on this overall as a cleric. And then this Spear of Penetration is going to be the paid spear we just got on Global, so I doubt that would be on the banner. And then this Book of Lessons is going to be very solid for sorcerers. It's going to have the same skill as the medical book, as well as Book of Conjuring that we got on the Halloween banner, which are both probably the best attack down books we have in the game right now. But this has Replenish Magic 2, which is probably the next desirable support skill besides Support Boon on rear guards. And then the stats are pretty good for an 18 cost at 5200. So I think this is going to be almost a must pull for sorcerers that are attack down specs, and maybe even other rear guards as well, because this is going to be a very solid addition to most rear guard grids. And to recap real quickly, probably only pull as a gunner just to get the job and nothing else really. Also sorcerers, this book, very solid. And then for clerics, you could considering get this nightmare because of the high defense stats. And then also the gunner class does have 700 defense, which could be a nice addition as well. But I don't think it's going to be a must pull for clerics and probably only a must pull for sorcerers. Looking at the next banner in the rotation, it's going to be the Pinocchio Breaker. This is going to be, for the most part, pretty passable for everybody. Looking at right here, it is going to have same breaker sets, 700 P defense, 100 P attack. Kind of weird artwork, not gonna lie. And then the sword, not very good. Only slightly favoring P attack. Tier 4 attack skill, which is good, and then DC 1. But I don't think there are enough breakers in the game for me to justify that this is going to be a must pull for physicals. But if you are a breaker, this is going to be a solid weapon, and then another breaker class in the game is always a nice addition. But as a crusher, as most people are probably speccing, this is going to be very passable. And at this point, crushers are probably starting to fully prep their full hammer grids for Half Nightmare coming in a few months. Looking at this bow, it is pretty decent. It has very good skills. It's going to have increased own magic attack by small amounts, and then mental focus too. And it's going to have very balanced stats. So I think this is what's going to kill it for the same reason as the other weapon we just went over. Most people are starting to spec towards one stat, and if you're specking towards M attack, this is only going to barely help you, not at all. So I think this is going to be a skip for gunners as well. And then looking at this, I could be wrong. I'm not too familiar with all the minstrel weapons, but this might be the first L quad attack instrument in the game. I'm not too sure though. So it's going to have physical attack and magical attack for 2 allies increased, moderate amount, and then replenish magic 1. And then it's going to have 5100 at 18 cost, which is I think on the low side. But I think overall, this is going to be almost a must pull for attack up minstrels, because this might be one of the few L quad attack up instruments in the game. And then looking at the staff, it's going to be single targets, Iron Shield deployment 2, pretty high defense stats, but everything else about it's so bad, I would not consider this as a cleric, and I would rather pull on the Snow White Gunner. Looking at the next one after the Pinocchio Breaker, it's going to be this possible Little Mermaid sorcerer job. Looking at it on this banner, it's going to have the same stats as other sorcerer jobs, 400 stats total, 100 in each category. Pretty nice artwork here. And then looking at the weapon, this is going to be a direct upgrade from something like Book of Brutality, which is already really bad, so that's not saying much, but this is going to be an alright addition to physical defense tomes. Even though physical defense isn't too relevant at the moment, I think if you do have one or two physical vanguards, this could be a nice addition, especially if you're still running Book of Brutality for some reason. Definitely replace it with something like this, but there are better books coming instead of that to go for. This is going to be a very niche nightmare as well. It's going to be just increasing physical defense for all surviving allies, and then really balanced stats across the board. People are starting to move away from defense buffing nightmares and also just buffing nightmares in general, and especially something niche as physical defense. You would have to go against a guild of all physical specialized vanguards to make any use of this at all, and then also has a prep time of 70 seconds compared to Wisp and Cecilia, which have 50 seconds, I believe. So this is going to be a very solid pass on the nightmare. And then moving down, we have this spear, which I think is very passable. Increases own magical defense, replenish magic 2, and then barely favoring M attack. Not too much else to say about this. It's going to be a very decent spear, but not usable for very long, so I don't think I'd recommend pulling for that. This is going to be the best weapon on the banner. It's going to be this bow. It's going to have the equivalent skill from that first sword we looked at. It's going to be a tier 3 damage skill, increase combo count by 5, and then M attack debuff, but eventually gets DC 2 at LL. Looking at these stats, it slightly favors M attack, but I think this primary skill alone is going to make this very nice for half nightmare grids. And the reason I think this bow is better than the sword is that because we have that half nightmare gunner, there's a lot more bows in use besides swords, so this is going to see much more play than that sword. So I think this is going to be almost a must pull for gunners for that alone. And there is also this staff, which is pretty solid. It's 2 target heal, which that alone as well is going to make it almost a must pull for clerics. And then a fixed chance to increase M defense of 1 allied vanguard by moderate amount while healing. It has, I think, lower defense stats than average, but I think 2 target heals are going to be solid enough to slot into any cleric grid at the moment. So to recap, possibly roll for the job if you're a sorcerer and you need a replacement for a physical defense down tome for some reason, and then also pull if you're a gunner 100% to get this bow, and then possibly pull if that staff is going to replace anything in your grid as a cleric. And then looking at the next banner after the Little Mermaid, we're going to have this Cinderella cleric banner. Looking at it in the same metal shop, it's going to have the same stats as most other clerics. 100 stats, 400 across the board. Pretty nice artwork as well. Looking at the staff, it's going to be very passable. It's going to be a single target heal to tier 3 because it buffs magic attack, and the recovery support 1. The skills alone don't make it very useful for any cleric right now. And then looking at the sword, it's going to have increased physical attack and physical defense by a small amount, and then P defense. Very balanced stats. I think hard pass for physical dealers. And then this hammer is going to be very similar to, almost the same actually, as the hammer we got on the step up for Alice Gunner, I believe. It's going to be increased physical defense by a small amount, and then also DC 2, and then slightly favoring P attack. This is going to be a must pull for crushers because there's just not enough DC 2 hammers in the game to fill out your grid. So this is going to be a step in the right direction for crusher grids, and with all the DC 2 hammers, crushers are going to be very solid by the end of the month. And then looking at this book, it's going to be similar to what we got on the last Sorc spec banner, I believe. instead of the 2 target guaranteed physical defense, it's going to be 1.5 physical defense tier 3, then also support boon 2. I think it's going to be the same scenario as if you pulled on that spec banner, is if you probably have 2 to 3 physical vanguards and you're also a physical, or you're also a defense down sorc, this will be a must pull for this book. But other than that, this book won't see too much play because it's really reliant on your vanguard, so it's up to you to make that decision yourself. And then it's also going to have this Silver Tiger Nightmare. It's going to have massively lower defense, physical and magical, for all frontline enemies. It's going to be the equivalent to Red Rose, what we already have, very similar. So I think if you don't have it, then you can pull it and it's going to have about comparable stats. But if someone already has it, there's no need to raise this again. But it does have a different, I'm not sure if Red Rose has the same thing, greater effect with higher enemy stacks. I could be wrong, but this could be more useful. I'm not too sure, I'd have to check that. And then looking at the possible event banner we could be getting at the end of the month. The reason that I think we could be getting this year 2 Christmas banner is because there wasn't a Christmas event in year 1 for SINoALICE and JP, but there was one in year 2. There also wasn't a year 1 Halloween banner in JP, but there also was a year 2 Halloween banner, which is what we got this year, and it was, I think, the identical banner. So I wouldn't be surprised if we got this, which was the year 2 Christmas banner. And looking at it in the metal shop here, we have the Snow White Christmas. It's going to have the same stats as the other breaker jobs, and really nice artwork here. And it's going to have this sword, which is solid, increases own physical attack and then DC 1. Really decent, favoring towards P attack. I think the only reason you would pull on this as a breaker is if you want the limited job. I think that's the reason you pull on most of these banners. But the sword isn't too useful for anybody except breakers. And then you're mostly, as a crusher, filling out your hammer grid because there's enough hammers in the game at this point to probably fill out a whole grid. Looking at the Red Riding Hood Christmas, it's going to have the same stats, 400 across the board, and then a really nice artwork here. The tome is really good. It's going to be the equivalent of a 17 cost and blue Book of Observations with support boon 1. This is going to be almost an upgrade from that, but I think it is useful to have this in your grid. It's going to have 17 cost stats, so about 4,800, and then it's going to have the physical attack and physical defense for 1.5 targets, and then support boon 1. So yeah, this is just a better Book of Observation, but it is blue, which is kind of unfortunate because green weapons are really good right now. But I think this will find a home in almost anyone's rearguard grid, so that's going to be a must pull for definitely sorcerers, and possibly for min sorcs if you need to still fill out your books. And then looking at this spear, which also came on the banner, it's going to deal magical damage to 1 to 2 targets and increase magical attack, and then M defense. This does have decent M attack favoring, but I don't think this is good enough to be in most half nightmare grids. I could be wrong though. I think the only reason you would pull on this is for the limited job as a paladin, and then if you happen to get the spear, that's just a bonus. This staff will probably be one of the best in the game when it comes out, because it has this very unique skill. I'm not too sure how useful this will be, but it does sound very useful. Heal 1.5 targets and then recovers their SP by 20 with recovery support 1 at L. It does have average defense stats for an 18 cost, but I think just because of how unique this skill is, and it's going to be the first in the game, if this does come out unnerfed, I think this is going to be a must pull for clerics as well as because the breaker job comes with 700 defense, so yeah, this is going to be a must pull for clerics as well. To recap, pull on this as a breaker if you are, nice job, and then also a decent usable weapon. Pull on this as a sorc, must pull as a sorc, and then possibly pull as a min sorc for this book. I think as a paladin or like any other vanguard, probably just pull on this banner for the limited jobs, and if you happen to get the spear, it could be usable, but it's probably not going to stay in your grid for too long. And then must pull as a cleric, because you're going to get this insanely unique staff, and then also could get 700 defense from this job. And I think that'll wrap it up for this video. I'll be coming out with a part 2 halfway through the month, and that's going to cover the second half of the month of December for banner predictions, and we'll also go over the possible New Year's banners that could be coming as well. I'm not going to touch on collaboration banners because there's not enough news about that, and they've been doing things a lot out of order, so there's really no way to predict things for that. But other than that, I think that'll finish this video, and thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.